Hello, this is Clarence Moye with Awards Daily here with Academy Award winning composer Justin Hurwitz, who I am talking to today about the upcoming film Babylon, which opens in theaters December 23rd. Justin, it's fantastic to meet you.
Hey, good to meet you, Clarence.
So, I have to start with I'd love to imagine the look on your face. I'm sure you had some prior knowledge of what was going on in Damien's mind, but I'd love to look at your face when you got this mammoth 180 plus script for Babylon and that you had to compose the score for that. I'd love to get inside your head about that period of time.
Yeah, let's see. That was the end of 2019. It was like fall of 2019 when I first got a script from Damien, and I read it. It took a while. I'm not a very fast reader, but I wanted to keep going. It was definitely, I was sucked in. It was an incredibly entertaining script. Just like one set piece and gag and crazy scene after another. So I was definitely entertained, and I got to it, and my head was kind of spinning just by the amount of music I could tell was going to be needed.
So, how close was the finished product to the original script that you read?
Pretty close. There are a few things that got cut.
Yeah.
The biggest difference is that the ending of this movie was not scripted.
Mm.
I won't give away what it is, but there's sort of a kind of a montage sequence at the end, which was never originally how it was going to end. And Damien had this idea kind of at the 11th hour, right before we were about to mix the movie, to create this sequence to kind of strengthen the theme that was already there. Um, and I guess I could say a little bit about it. So that character Diego goes to the movie theater and he sees Singing in the Rain, and that's where it was supposed to end. But to
Mm.
create something bigger, to create something about cinema history in a larger sense, that was really Damien's idea right at the very end of the process. And it was a saving grace for me because I was struggling to deliver the music to the mix in time, and it was like a day before the mix was supposed to start. We were mixing the score for months, and everybody was like, "The music has to be at the dub stage. Promise us the music is gonna be at the dub stage." I'm like, "I'm doing my best. I don't know. I'm doing my best," and I was like a day away from having to make a lot of people very angry at me for not having the music ready. And then Damien raised his hand. He was like, I'd like to cut a different ending to the movie. And I was like, thank God that this process is coming to a pause for, it's not my fault, not my fault this time. But he had this great idea. He cut this new ending, and then we kind of went on hiatus for a little bit, and I needed about another month to create the new music because the new ending needed a lot more music. It needed like 5 more minutes of music, and it was very dense music. So I needed some time to make that. So we kind of just paused post production while we sort of dialed in this new ending.
And I know you've known Damien since college, since you were roommates together at Harvard, right?
Yep.
So obviously there's symbiosis between the two of you. Worked on the films that we see there behind you, Whiplash, La La Land. But how would you normally approach a film like this? This is such an epic film, right? It is a massive set of characters, a very tempestuous period in Hollywood history. How do you approach an epic like that?
Yeah. I mean, we started just by marking up the script, going through the script and marking where there would be music, at least what we could tell at the time where there would be music. A lot of it was very clear. Certainly, anywhere there was a performance was clear. But where we had to really think about it, or I had to think about it, because a lot of this was in Damien's head, was where that music would spill over into other sequences. So it's like we might have a scene with Sydney, the Sydney character playing trumpet. But what I had to understand is, okay, does that music end there, or does that carry us into, and very often it carried us through a montage or through some other kind of sequence. So I had to understand all of that, understand what was in Damien's head, and then start, first coming up with the themes and the tunes on the piano and creating arrangements, but also structuring it, thinking about how it was going to be used, what it had to be dramatically, both for the on-screen stuff and then what it would spill over into. So that during pre-production was a big task, and Damien was, after we worked at the script level, Damien was creating storyboards. So I was working to storyboards and tailoring the music to storyboards, and then he was tailoring the storyboards to the music. So those symbiosis, like you say, those were kind of developing together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine, you know, you've got a shorthand between the two of you where he kind of, you know, you kind of know what he would like after having worked with him on 4 or 5 films. Um, when it comes to just sort of you're writing the material, you've got your score, but it comes in terms of representing it for the film. I know you know, obviously there's an inkling that you may want to go to a 20s authentic sound, but it doesn't, it's not period authentic, right? I mean, it's played with, I think it's period instruments or things that we would see of the era, but not necessarily in the same sound. Talk to me about making that choice.
Yeah, we both really wanted to stay away from 20s jazz because it just tends to be, at least the stuff that was recorded, tends to be very tame, very quaint. It's a sound we've heard a lot, you know, that kind of swinging Charleston-y sort of thing. And we just didn't want to do that. The movie is very wild, very unhinged. And so the music kind of had to be that. Um, it had to be, we wanted it to be more aggressive, really, more in your face than what we think of as 20s music. So yeah, like you say, at least when it comes to the bands on screen, that's more or less the lineup. I might have cheated it a little bigger, made the horn section a little bigger in this, but more or less, a couple of trumpets, a couple of trombones, 3 saxes, rhythm section. That is more or less a 20s band, but we wanted it to be a lot more inspired by these sort of driving riffs, the kind of riffs you have in rock and roll, the sort of things you could imagine on a like distorted guitar, but
Mm-hmm.
we give it to unison horns, which is a very muscular sound to give these like riffs to an entire horn section. That's a sort of a style we use a lot, which is not, I don't think they did that in the 20s, not that I'm aware of, but it's believable enough in the 20s because again, the band is the lineup more or less of a 20s band. It's just a more aggressive, muscular way of handling a band like that. A lot of inspirations too from modern dance music with the real sort of driving kick drum and the dance hi-hats and the sort of structures of dance music that sort of build anticipation and deliver these drops that get you wanting to dance. So that was a big inspiration as well. In the actual score, when it comes to the score, you know, the underscore cues, there are a handful of instruments that were definitely not period. Like I used an electric guitar for one of the cues because it just felt right. I use a mellotron, went to the Vintage Synth Museum in Glendale where they have an actual tape playing mellotron and used that for these flute samples that gave us a real circus quality. Because again, circus is another idea in this score. There are a lot of cues that have a circus feel. So that's a non-period instrument. And then there's just weird instruments like kazoos and slide whistles and party horns. I put those into a bunch of the cues. There's this incredible bunch of incredible musicians. But there's this one baritone sax player, Leo Pellegrino. He goes by Leo P. He's got this band, Too Many Zoos. And he's known for playing dance music on a sax, which is exactly what we were writing. That was sort of, we were demoing all this dance music on a sax. So I went to YouTube and I went searching for like, who plays dance music on a sax? And this guy does exactly that. So I started working with Leo and he plays all of these, he has all these extended techniques, all of these weird sounds, these like squeals and squawks and all these weird sounds he makes that are also definitely not period sounding, but they just felt right. They just felt like the kind of zoo that this movie is. So that became sort of a texture of the score as well. So yeah, it's mostly sounds that are not period, but very often on the instruments that are believable in the period.
As I mentioned, I was going through the full score this morning because it just dropped on streaming, and there is a sound somewhere along there. I don't remember what track it was, but there's something that sounds like a theremin. Are you using a theremin?
There are
Okay.
two tracks where I used the theremin. Well, it's right behind me. I
Oh
used it
yeah.
on the last score. First Man, of course, was
Mhm.
like mostly a theremin score. That was like the lead instrument of that score. And as we were sort of playing around with early ideas for this, we realized that the theremin was invented in the 20s by Leo Theremin. So we snuck it into a couple of scenes. There's one track at the Wallach party, at that opening party, where
Mhm.
I think she didn't quite make it onto screen because the angles that were chosen for the cut. But there's a track called Miss Idaho that's on the
Yes.
album that's led by theremin, and there was a theremin player on screen kind of doing it. And then there's a track later when they get to the blockhouse, this really sort of creepy underground club, and it has all these levels. They descend down into the levels of this club, and at the first level, there's like a cage fight going on, and the track playing is basically taikos and theremin. And again, there's a theremin. You see her for a second. There's like a theremin player in the back, doing the thing. But it was fun. Yeah, it was fun to be able to use it in a couple of tracks.
As I listen to my favorite track so far, Voodoo Mama, which has been out for a couple of weeks now, I have this theory, and I want you to, it's fine if you burst my bubble, that's totally fine. But I have this theory that there's hysteria, there's mania within the film, and the score has to represent that. And it's almost like there are cues, there are notes that just keep going a little bit longer than you would expect them to, than the ear is expecting. Like I'm expecting like a natural cutoff, and it just keeps going for a couple of more beats. Is that intentional? Or am I just over analyzing it?
No, I think you're exactly right. And just the structure of the music to begin with. I mentioned writing really riff-based music for these bands, and it's a similar idea in the sense that it just kind of drills you over and over and over again with this relentless riff. So there are a number of tracks: Voodoo Mama, Damascus Thump, Miss Idaho, Red Devil. There are a bunch of tracks on this album where hopefully the tracks stay engaging, but it is intentionally a very relentless riff-based piece. There's an orchestral cue at the Hearst Party. The track is called Hearst Party, which is very obviously inspired by Ravel's Bolero, in that it has a similar structure of a couple of variations on a theme that keep repeating and repeating and repeating as sort of insanity builds at this party. So the jazz, when it comes to the jazz stuff and the orchestral stuff, it was definitely a strategy to take a relentless approach and have things just keep building and building and building towards mayhem. And a lot of these tracks, they're designed to also really go off the rails as we get towards the end of them. It was a direction I was giving to the band. It was something I was doing with tempos, and it's something I was doing with some of the layers of these tracks. As these riff-based tracks get towards the end, they tend to speed up a little, and I had certain elements like rush in very intentionally or play at a completely different tempo. In Voodoo Mama, it's at the the thing is going at this, but while that's going, I have I have just I have a metal tub. It's in the score at one point, metal tub, and then I specify a different tempo. So it's like this person is hitting a metal tub in a completely different universe than the song. And there's a lot of that stuff where there's just sort of cacophonous elements. So you have the relentless driven thing, and then you have other elements that are adding this sort of going off the rails, losing control kind of feel.
Yeah, and at the end of Voodoo Mama, I imagine Voodoo Mama, if you visually represent that song, I imagine it as a top spinning very tightly, and then by the time it gets to the end, you know how tops just kind of fizzle out and they go all nuts. That's how because it sounds like that circus breaking down at the end of the song, which is really a great touch. Very quickly, tell me about choosing one of my personal favorite. Thank you for doing that. Classical pieces, Night on Bald Mountain. Fantastic choice. Why did you use that?
That was, I remember when the first draft of the script, Damien knew he wanted to use a classical piece of music there, and I forget if he wrote it into the script or if he asked for my opinion on it. I remember we were going back and forth on a few ideas there, but I forget if that was my idea or his idea. Ultimately, could have well been his idea.
Okay.
It's a great piece of music. It's dramatic. Yeah. It's iconic. It's it's from we think of it as Fantasia, but to set it to something, like live action as dramatic as that is, I think is just a really cool, meeting of music and image.
I'd like to talk about a couple of character themes first, but first, you talked about um, Joe Von Adepo's character, the jazz trumpet. Talk to me about sort of reflecting his journey. He's got a very specific arc through the film. Talk to me about reflecting that through the score that you had him play.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. As we track him through the film, the pieces he plays sort of, take him on a bit of a journey. So we see him at the party and he's playing these very, very unhinged pieces with that band. The jazz band, which, like I said, is playing kind of a more aggressive, something a little unexpected for the 20s, but believable. So Welcome, Voodoo Mama, some of the other tracks that are, you know, kind of a little more underscorey, but still at that party. That's where he starts. He's just freewheeling. He's got this fun freewheeling band and he's just having fun. And then he gets, once he comes into the studio system, he's playing some pretty tame music. We see him playing Singing in the Rain, the 1929 review of Singing in the Rain. And he's making it his own, but it's kind of it's definitely more quaint than where we've seen him start. And then a really important beat for him is the track on the album called Damascus Thump, where he's shooting he's like shooting a scene where he's the center of it. He's on stage. It's a movie within the movie. They're shooting Sydney playing in this movie, and he's asked to do something very humiliating on this set. So this track, Damascus Thump, is getting at this kind of anger. But it's also it's doing a few things because it also spills over into some other storylines that are going on. The Brad Pitt character Jack is racing in his car to go confront Irv Thalberg about something. You have Manny marching down a hallway trying to find Nellie. So you got people are on a mission. There's a lot of anger going on in all these storylines, but really Sydney's the center of that piece of music. Not just because he's playing it in part of this sequence, but because it's, he's dramatically, this is kind of his moment of the movie. So yeah, it's just another really relentless, driven, angry piece. And then and then basically at the end of the movie, he's back sort of where he's started, kind of where he's comfortable. He's back in a little jazz club doing what he loves, playing a tune that we've heard before in the movie, but I've arranged it to be probably the most 20s of the things we have. It's got these moaning clarinets, these really sort of heavy, shaking vibrato clarinets, almost crying. In fact, in my tracks, I called it crying clarinet. And he plays this really, really beautiful trumpet solo that was recorded by Dante Winslow, this great, great trumpeter in LA. And it's kind of back to his roots is what that last track is. It's called Gold Coast Rhythm, Sydney's Solo.
Another theme that sort of persists throughout the film is the Manny and Nellie theme, or Manny and Nellie's theme, where these are two characters that are sort of, they interact initially in the film, they go on their individual trajectories, and then they, obviously have very different endings by the end of the film. Talk to me about the inspiration for that piece.
Yeah. So the tune itself is just, we were looking for bittersweet melancholy. And then I guess where we got into the most experimentation is with the arrangement and what instruments we'd put it on. We went around a lot of ideas before we settled where we did, which is each of their scenes, each time it's used for their relationship, their story. It's a blend of three pianos. The first piano is a very beautiful Steinway, a very warm Steinway. I always go, whenever we record, I go around to all these piano warehouses in LA and I look for very special pianos. And I found this very warm, beautiful, mid-size, kind of like this, a little bigger than this one, mid-size Steinway that had all this character and all this warmth to it. So that's the first piano. The second piano is a spinet, small piano that's been treated with tacks on the hammers to give it this sort of twang, and then detuned. So it's a bit out of tune. And then the third piano is an upright, one of those taller parlor uprights that's very, very, very out of tune and broken. So when you mix these three pianos, you get the sweetness from the Steinway, you get this sort of sour out of tune quality from the other two pianos, different amounts of out of tune. And when you mix it all together, you get the sweet and the sour, and it just felt kind of fragile and broken, like their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually, beyond just the three pianos, we had to find the right amount of each piano to get that right amount of how beautiful and how broken it felt. So balancing all that was a little bit of a trial and error as well. But that became the sound of their love story, their really messed up love story.
Right. Brings an emotional connection in a world of debaucherous insanity.
Yeah. Yeah. And we also, by the way, some of those cues, some of them are just very spare, just those three pianos being used really emotionally. But there are a couple of cues in that same arc, Manninelli cues, where it's the same three pianos, but we add some circus sounds. Mm-hmm. So there's that kind of like mellotron, there's a calliope, there's like an organ and some other there's an accordion, there's just some stuff to give it a little bit of a circus quality, which also felt kind of like their relationship's a bit of a circus.
Right. Last question for you. Looking back over the entire 2 hours that you had to score for the film, roughly 2 hours, what was the most challenging scene to score?
That's really hard. Maybe the track I mentioned, Damascus Thump, which is when Sidney is shooting and he's asked to do that really humiliating thing, because like I said, it was a very important character moment for him, mm-hmm. but it also had to work for the rest of this sequence, which is Jack, like I said, speeding down, going to confront somebody, and Manny, and there were a bunch of other things. So it had to do a lot of things for that sequence, but ultimately it had to really get us inside Sidney's head. And just seeing Jovan perform that sequence, he's playing it, and then he rests, and he just sort of like is staring. We're in his head for a while, and the band is going for a long time, and Damien just holds on his face while he's like thinking, what do I do? Do I walk off the set? Do I finish the song? What do I do? And then he just like picks his trumpet back up and finishes it. And Jovan's performance is incredible. Mm-hmm. The acting, not to mention the fact that he actually learned to play all that, his musical performance is perfect. It's just a really it was a challenging piece to write, and it was a really powerful piece to sort of be there to witness be performed.
I can't imagine. I mean, it's such a talented cast, so much talent in this film. I absolutely love this film. Those are all the questions I have for you. Thank you so much. Brilliant score. I love that you continue to deliver new music and you never sound repetitive. I mean, it's you're always pushing yourself, and I really admire you for that.
I appreciate that.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Clarence. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.